Within the circularity field, there is so much you can do because the topics vary from minimizing waste to kind of creating or innovating new business models. So I think that if we want to take the circularity into consideration holistically, we should start from the portfolio management, because there the decisions are being done on what do we actually offer and to what direction do we bring our offering.
Welcome to the Circular Coffee Break podcast, where we will be casually talking about everything circular and beyond. My guest today is Anniina Virta-Toika. She is a VP Sustainability at Konecranes. Konecranes, for those of you not familiar, is a Finnish company specializing in the manufacturing and service of cranes and lifting equipment, serving a very wide range of industries, including manufacturing, shipyards, ports, terminals, and so on. Before joining Konecranes, she worked in different sustainability roles, for example, at WWF Finland, Fazer, and Varova. I'm really looking forward to discussing with Anniina how Konecranes is integrating sustainability and circularity across its operations, from innovative design and life cycle strategies to supplier partnerships and industry-wide impact. Welcome to the show, Anniina.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Happy to be here.
Great to have you. And maybe to get us started, could you maybe briefly introduce yourself and your journey into the field of sustainability and also your current role as VP of Sustainability at Konecranes?
Sure thing. So I've basically done my whole career within the field of sustainability. I even studied first logistics and then in the business school side, the corporate environmental management. So having the good background for this work. Mm-hmm. And you already explained where I've been working with and having always more or less the focus on the environmental management. Now at Konecranes, I'm leading on a group level our holistic sustainability agenda. Mm-hmm. And about my controls, so we are a global company having operations in 50 countries. I have roughly 16,600 colleagues all mm-hmm. around the globe. We have manufacturing in all of the regions as well as service operations. So when it comes to Konecranes, the split between our business operations is that roughly 40% of the revenues comes from the service business, and the rest, roughly 60%, comes from the equipment. And you already nicely explained, Michael, what industries we are serving. So what we are actually doing is that we are providing equipment for material handling, meaning mostly cranes and hoists for the industrial customers, and then the container handling equipment for the ports and terminals, as well as servicing, providing also solutions like digital software systems for the customers. Within this context, what does sustainability mean in a wider perspective is that our agenda focuses on 4 commitments, which are focusing on the topics of safety and security, environmental management, respecting human rights, as well as ensuring ethical business conduct is applied within the value chain. And here within this podcast, we talk about the environmental things more than the others. There the focus is our spearhead topic is the climate ambition, reaching the net zero targets in a long term and reaching the minus 50% 1.5 aligned climate targets by the end of 2030. And the role of circular economy is really, really big for us. We see it as a tool to minimize the climate impact, as well as for us, it's really, really good business opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot for this introduction. I think that already gave a very good overview of the topics you're working on and the balance needed. Now, in a company like Konecranes, like balancing industrial demand that is coming from your customer, from the industry, with the sustainability goals that you outlined can actually be very challenging because there's very competing demands there very often. Could you maybe share how you've integrated sustainability and more specifically circularity in design or maintenance strategies that improve product longevity, recyclability, and basically has an impact across the different environmental but also societal targets that you mentioned?
Within the circularity field, there is so much you can do because the topics vary from minimizing waste to kind of creating or innovating new business models. So I think that if we want to take the circularity into consideration holistically, we should start from the portfolio management, because there the decisions are being done on what do we actually offer and to what direction do we bring our offering. The other thing is, of course, adopting these circularity principles to the product design. As we all really much know, roughly 80% of the impacts are anyway defined in the design phase. So that must be handled. We use a concept called design for environment within our product design. And then maybe the third level is the environmental management within own manufacturings. So ensuring that we are efficient, use as little raw materials and resources, as well as managing the wastes. So after ensuring that the circularity aspects are brought to all of these, I think it's inbuilt that we are focusing on these topics. At Konecranes, because the service business has always been the core of what we are doing, it's sort of an inbuilt already to our offering, because it is already a good business case for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And circularity naturally very often includes services to enhance longevity, to basically make sure that products are also usable along the life cycle in the best possible, in the most efficient way. Now, you mentioned the integration of circular economy principles. Do you maybe have a couple of examples from equipment life cycles or refurbishment processes or services where you have been using circularity principles, where you have been integrating these principles?
Truly, yes. Few practical examples on what we are actually offering, or how these three principles that I explained are impacting. So first, how do we design the equipment that we are selling? We need to ensure that those are maintainable and repairable, and modularity is one topic in improving that. Now, as this electrification of the diesel-driven equipment is our biggest challenge to minimize the emissions, I'm really excited about the modularity regarding the batteries. Because as we all know, the technology is rapidly changing and improving. So if we are designing products where the batteries can be changed and new technology applied, there is a huge opportunity, because then we are ensuring that the equipment don't get old, but the technology can be retrofitted. The other thing, one business area where I'm mostly excited is the retrofits and modernizations. So we have the capabilities of modernizing an old diesel-driven port cranes that has been already in place for 20 years using diesel. We can modernize that so that it becomes fully electrified. It includes all the latest technological advancements. And if you consider how does a huge port crane that is unloading and loading the vessels look like, it's really big equipment having tons of steel on it. So it basically means that we don't need to replace the steel structures, only the technology needs to be replaced. So I think that that's a really good example from the circular business. One additional thing, maybe the positive gains are not that big, but still is a remanufacturing. which we can do and are doing already in many of our sites. We have the capabilities of remanufacture both electric components as well as mechanical components, where one example is rope drum. We just recently conducted an LCA study to compare a new rope drum versus an remanufactured one, and surprise, the emission savings potential is half. So really good.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point you're raising there, because naturally in the equipment you're selling and your customers are using, the life cycle of different components is naturally very different. In the electronics and the smartness of the devices, you naturally have a very, very quick life cycle as new developments are happening very, very fast. At the same time, the steel and the design of the cranes themselves, they haven't necessarily changed that much in the last, I would argue, tens or hundreds of years, maybe, as the basic design is very similar. So if you can decouple the two by modernization, by refurbishing, by reuse, you can naturally save a lot of CO2 emissions, but also be very circular and save a lot of materials. I think that's a very interesting perspective in that context.
Yeah, indeed. And always there is pros and cons with things. The more we use material, it might be that it prolongs the lifetime. But on a short term, then it means bigger emissions or more usage of the material. So you need always find a balance on where we should be. And of course, the aim is to prolong the lifetime all the time and keep the equipment in place and ongoing as long as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you're working across various sectors, different sectors. Do you see differences in the demands or in the approach between those industries, but between those customers when it comes to sustainability and circularity?
Yes, of course, there are a lot of differences to be seen. So we are serving big process industrial companies, for example, in the paper or energy industries that are basically sharing the same ambitions as us. So they are demanding a lot, and they want to have the good and sustainable technology in place. On the other hand, we also serve small warehouses where they need to lift something really seldomly, really rarely. And maybe their sustainability needs are not as much. And maybe the equipment is not contributing to their process as much. So there we can see a lot of difference. The good thing is that while we are serving so many industries, we are in a position of seeing where the forerunners are and can then learn more. Where I see even more difference is on different regions. So we are serving the wide range of industries, plus we are serving in all of the regions, and we see definitely at least the impact of regulations. Luckily, we see some environmental movement happening in US and APAC area as well. So not only in the EMEA where the regulation is at its heaviest, but there, when the regulation steps into a game for the global player, we need to ensure that we are fulfilling the, for example, hazardous substance regulations for all of the industries and regions and so forth. So it becomes a lot more complex thing to handle.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, and I think specifically at the moment, as the regulation is not standardized across the regions, you have very different requirements in various regions, and I think we've only at the beginning of that. There's more emerging. You see in the US, the stock exchange is putting in new ESG requirements. In Asia, you see pretty much each country having their own approach almost to sustainability. So as a global company, as Konecranes, you naturally have the requirements that you need to fulfill everywhere. I think that can be a challenge, I assume. other thing, I mean, looking at the customers is one side and their diversity, but also naturally you need to understand very well your supply chain when you think about circularity. And that has traditionally been a challenge to create supply chain transparency across the supply chain and also influence across the supply chain. Um, can you maybe share some examples or some approaches how you basically implement but also follow through on sustainability and circularity principles across the supply chain? Because we're naturally talking about scope 1, scope 2, but also scope 3, which in many cases, specifically for globally operating companies, can be very challenging. So what's your approach there? How are you looking at your supply chain and basically upholding these sustainability and circularity principles?
Really, really good question. So first answering to this scope 3. So in our case last year, the impact of scope 3 was 99.2%. So for us, it's the biggest one as well. In our case, the biggest emission category is the use of sold product. And the second biggest one is called purchased goods and services. So exactly what do we purchase? How do our supply chain look like? I'm wondering whether the peep from the teams actually came
Oh, no.
to the recording. Okay, good. Then continuing. So in wider context, of course, we set the sustainability requirements for our supply chain in our supplier code of conduct. That was just updated this year, where during this update, we increased the level of sustainability related requirements quite heavily and now, for example, we are requiring the CO2 data from relevant suppliers if agreed so. So currently, the focus still is a lot on the climate side. Mm-hmm. So it is a driving factor still. And steel as a raw material is the leading thing within our purchasing goods and services. That is the focus. We hope to increase the share of recycled content, but still we are unfortunately underway to understand fully the baseline of ours. So if you are not directly purchasing from the steel mill, the third party's visibility to the data is not on the level where we wish it to be. So this requires a lot of cooperation and engagement with the suppliers to get the data, plus to get the transformation ongoing. And of course, we are expecting the steel industry to transform to low carbon as many others are expecting that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And within the other thing, I already mentioned that when we were discussing about the regulations and that part is for example, substance management. That's in our case not a big impact thing, but still many of the commercial electric components are including really, really small amounts of lead, for example, which is okay by the regulators, but it requires us to report on that, which is again, perfectly okay, but the substance-related regulations are really scattered. So different continents and different countries are regulating different substances, and that makes it challenging. And again, we need to build a lot of cooperation within our supply chain to get that information.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, and I think at the end of the day, it's also naturally dependent on the supplier, on the capabilities that the supplier has in this area. So how are you cooperating with the suppliers in that context to help them also build the capabilities that they need? Background for the question is, I mean, very often, specifically in the EU, we now hear that the big companies are on the hook from a regulatory point of view, and a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises are trying to waive the topic and are saying like, oh yeah, for us, it's still in a couple of years, we don't need to look at that. But actually with global supply chains, very complex supply chains, everyone is somehow impacted directly or indirectly. And then very often large companies are in a position where they need to take the education, where they need to basically help a lot of their suppliers understand what it actually is they should be doing, and what are the capabilities, what is the data, what is the approach, what are the processes that they need. How do you approach that in a, I would assume, very complex supplier network that you have?
You almost answered to the question by yourself. So Konecranes has a wide supply chain. We have more than 20,000 tier one suppliers. So of course we can't cooperate similarly with all of them. So of course what we need to be doing is to identify the highest impact or the riskiest suppliers and then plan how to cooperate with them. But I do echo what you mentioned, that we as a big corporation, we have the knowledge, we have much more resources than the smaller ones do, but we are still expecting that all sized companies are changing and having the capabilities. And that, I think, that gives us an requirement to provide some support for the smaller suppliers. So, for example, now we are having a lot of discussions with some of the suppliers who are providing steel on what kind of data we are seeking and how you should approach the calculations, or how do you identify the substances within the materials or components that they are providing. So basically training and engaging with the highest priority suppliers.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and I think you need to prioritize specifically in a wide network, as you mentioned. You cannot work with everyone equally. That's absolutely right. Now, looking at another aspect of like this transition towards sustainability to circularity, I mean, technology will take a leading role in enabling a lot of the things we're talking about. Are there some technological developments, or more broadly business developments, that you're seeing, or industry shifts that you feel can help you in furthering the agenda that you mentioned at the top of the show, and help you reach these targets maybe more efficiently, maybe faster, or in a different way? So is there anything you've been following, you've been understanding, as I assume, as the VP of sustainability, this is on your agenda, and you're naturally following quite closely what's happening in the industry, but most likely also beyond that?
Trying to do my best on that. Unfortunately, now my bandwidth is full of CSRDs and CS-DDDs and so forth. But the kind of changes that I've been following, this is not a recent change, but I see the scale increasing heavily all the time. And this is a big thing, is the automation. And as the electrification and automation walks hand in hand, so the latter one can't happen before the first one. So the products needs to be electrified. I think that this is something that will impact a lot and will scale up even further. The next step being autonomous material handling operations. That goes to the far other side of the automation. And that is really, really interesting to follow how that evolves. The other thing that is really, really interesting for me is the future development of battery-related ecosystems. So as the electrification again goes beyond, the number of the electrified equipment is increasing. How do we build an ecosystem where we are ensuring that we are getting responsibly manufactured batteries? How do we ensure that all of the equipment are designed to be modular so that they can be modernized? How is the second life of the batteries? How is the dismantling of the batteries? How do we take back the precious raw materials from the batteries and put them back to the loop? So this is something that will evolve really rapidly, I wish.
Yeah.
And the other hand, from our business side, is the scaling of the remanufacturing capabilities, so that remanufacturing would actually be in a larger scale, financially attractive business. I think that because we are not in a industry of mass-produced equipment, and so we are having manufacturing sites in all of the regions, but really few of them. We are serving customers all around the globe. So there is a big challenge of the logistics chain being efficient or making any sense, as well as mentioned, as the scale of the equipment and remanufacturing is not huge. I think that here we would benefit a lot for having global level regulation supporting with the refurbishment and remanufacturing. I wish this becomes more attractive going forward, because I think that what we should be doing, for example, for the steel components, there is a good recycling infrastructure in place, which is a second life business. But is that the best that we can do with the steel components? I think that there is more value adding business than only recycling.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you mentioned batteries. I guess it's a similar question. Do you use batteries for a second life use case, or do you get them to recycling in order to create new, more efficient batteries going forward? I think it's a very complex question at the end of the day that doesn't necessarily have a yes or no or black or white type of answer, but it depends on the context, on the use cases. And as you said, I mean, if you can reuse steel components without needing to recycle and manufacture them again, it's naturally, again, CO2 emission saved, but it's also naturally material used more efficiently in that context. So I think that's a very important and very good point you're making there. And as we're talking about various components, it naturally doesn't make it easier to look at all of these things at the same time. Now, the coffee is unfortunately empty, but Anniina, before I let you go, maybe a question a little bit looking into the future. How do you see the future of sustainability and circularity in your work and at Konecranes? So what are the priorities you see in your work, but also for the broader company and maybe also the broader supplier and customer network that you're working with? Where are the priorities that you're seeing? What are the most burning topics? You mentioned already a couple. But what is it that you will be focusing on for the weeks and months and years to come?
Well, at least the battery thing, it's so big and challenging. So that's not maybe on days, but months and years. That will be one focus area. And the other one is the service overall. So Konecranes has always been focused on service, as mentioned, and we have one of the largest service networks there are, which means that as we are a big player, we have been able to invest a lot for the technological solutions. So, for example, for us, we can make the service work planning more efficient. For the customer, we can offer predictive maintenance. We know how the components are wearing down, so we can offer for the customers a predictive maintenance where we ensure that there is no downtime for their operations. So and ensuring that we continue innovating new circular economy related business models, because there is lots more to be done going forward. Maybe one thing to point out that as the service business is there with all of these concepts mentioned already today, we don't always acknowledge that this is actually circular business, but it is circular economy with a big C. So reminding ourselves on that narrative as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's anyway very often if you talk with people in the industry about circularity, it's not often used as a term, but it's more about energy efficiency. It's lifetime extension. It's material efficiency, and all of these things that people are talking about. They might not call it circularity, or they might not even connect it with circularity in many cases. But it's very often in a different, with a different wording in a different context that is being used. So you're absolutely right. It's actually important to understand how different things contribute to that at the end of the day. Thanks a lot. I could still continue for a long time. It's a very interesting perspective, with basically the different angles that you've been bringing in from a material point of view, but also services, maintenance, life cycle extension, and different new business models. Thanks a lot, Anniina, for joining me today.
Thank you so much.
Great. For all of you listening, thanks for tuning in today. We hope you enjoyed this episode and found some valuable insights to take away. If you're enjoying the Circular Coffee Break, please consider leaving a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It's actually a great help for us in growing our community and spreading the word about circularity and sustainability. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss any of the upcoming episodes packed with inspiring guests and great conversations on sustainability and circularity every 2 weeks. The only thing left for me is to thank you for listening today, and I'm looking forward to seeing all of you here on the Circular Coffee Break podcast.